for coming tonight. As I introduced myself, my name is Stefanie Calens. And just to give you a quick little synopsis of my specific role at ASU, I am the community engagement liaison. So what I get to do is I get to take the knowledge from my research staff and bring that into the everyday communities. So I always make a joke with our academics in the office that like I'm the person who talks to like the real people and really kind of, puts the information together in a way that anybody can understand it. And so we are known as STIR. Everything in academia is an acronym, but it stands for Office of Sex Trafficking, Intervention, and Research. And one of the major pros, I would say, to what we're able to do in the office is that this really is, this is bigger than just like what our office personnel are working on. Our collaborations involve the City of Phoenix, as well as various community partners. So it really is that kind of wide scope of what it takes to really get information out, to do outreach and trainings and all those things. So we provide that data and that research, but it takes a lot of boots on the ground, and that's what we rely on our partners for most. All right. So what I figured I could do is sometimes it's really difficult to distinguish, especially if you're reading online, the subtitles and articles and things like that, and exactly what is human trafficking. So what I always start with is that human trafficking is that broad term. That is your main, kind of think of it as like your foundational term. Now, what that is that is broken up into two sections. So that is the sex trafficking side and the labor trafficking side. And it's always quite interesting when I'm tabling to specific events and people are always kind of like, oh, ASU, and then they look a little bit closer at like the tablecloth and they're like, oh, trafficking, and it kind of like, it's like that uncomfortable awkwardness that all of our staff has really gotten used to, like launching conversations off that. But I'm always like, man, we are so fun. Like we work in the sex trafficking field, but why not add the labor as well too? And it's funny because people don't really like know what to say when you talk about that. But the main point of really understanding is how it's broken up into both of these different, very exclusive sections. All right. So on top of understanding that there is sex and labor, the federal definitions matter. And believe it or not, we are really still in infancy. So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, if you think about this, we've only had federal legislation for barely 26 years on how we define what trafficking specifically in, whether it's sex or labor trafficking, to actually have that language on the books. My director in our office at ASU, she's literally a handful of probably 5 to 10 academic professionals across the nation who have been in this line of work for the past 2 decades. So until the federal legislation really got behind, like, how do we identify who a trafficking victim is? We had a lot of numbers, but we couldn't put a lot of meaning to them. That is until the TVPA came out. So what is important to understand, and you could transpose this for sex trafficking or labor trafficking, is that this is a situation where that, in this instance, if we're talking about sex, that commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. Those are your trafficking foundations. It has to fit in one of those. Force, fraud, or coercion, when a third party is benefiting from that act. Does that make sense? So there has to be a third party benefit, and it has to fall under force, fraud, or coercion. Now, if this person who is exchanging, in this instance, the sex for something of value, and they are under the age of 18, that is always trafficking, period. Because they're a minor, there's no consent on the table. So when there's, and they don't even, there doesn't even have to be a third party involved in a minor instance. And so that is one of the differences as far as when you look at age absolutely matters. But specifically in a lot of the data that I'm going to show you today, we deal with adults. So if we do have operations or things that can come across juveniles, immediately our police department is involved. So we do not handle juvenile cases, nor do we outreach to juveniles. Does anyone have any questions on what this entails? Pretty straightforward. So here's some examples of those categories. Believe it or not, the kidnapping scenarios, and again, and I probably should have prefaced with, our research and our data is domestic based. So we also don't deal in anything international. We do understand that there are different nuances, things look different on how that is in international countries, but what we focus on here is domestic victims. And I mentioned that because a lot of times, and I would say that a lot of what we see in media, online, all of those different platforms is really that kidnapping, kind of like that white van scenario, I always try to say. But to be honest with you, our numbers show that in a kidnapping scenarios or trafficking, those are less than 3% of the cases. So oftentimes people are looking for kind of this boogeyman that doesn't really exist, because believe it or not, under the force side, the majority of our traffickers exhibit things like physical violence, or even sexual assault. So we will see those more as you do in a kidnapping scenario. Some things to look at as far as what fraud is. Tricking victims to believe that a trafficker loves him or her. We actually call that that's a Romeo trafficker. So that's kind of that boyfriend. I care about you, I adore you. They build that relationship based on a lie when there's other intentions there. Coercion. We do see a lot of the kind of debt mortgage and like papers, identification, withholding, things like that, both on the sex and the labor side. It's pretty difficult to obviously get a job, right? Run a new place. If somebody has your ID, somebody has your birth certificate, somebody has your social, all of those important documents, we have had cases where victims have had those held. So there's really not a whole lot of things you can do when somebody's got those identifying factors above you, except to be complicit in what they're asking you to do. So these are, and there's various different options, but these are really kind of specific examples to what falls under force, fraud, and coercion. That's what fits the trafficking, the federal definition for that. No, you okay?
Yeah.
Oh, those are the worst. Does anyone have any questions on any of these? And feel free just to kind of chime in as well too. I love that.
Well, I don't know if you want that. Maybe you got a couple people questions.
No,
I
that's okay.
got a few meeting questions.
Okay, all right. All right. Also, smuggling versus trafficking. Again, this is a really big misconception, really for the most part, because people don't understand what the difference is. Human smuggling, first and foremost, is going to be a crime against a border. The crime is against the country, period. Smuggling is always transportation based. And it's easy for us to understand that, being a border state, right? A human smuggler, and I'm just going to use this example from Mexico, right, is going to have a transaction occur where they are smuggling a person, a family, whatever, a group across the border, and their job in that is now done. Now, does the people or person coming across that border, do they have higher vulnerabilities? Of course they do, but it doesn't necessarily equate to a nexus in automatic trafficking. There's a difference. Human trafficking is that exploitation based where the crime is against the person. So you are now, think of it as you are now the drug sale, except instead of a one-time sale, like, bag of marijuana or, pills, you're sold over and over and over again under that exploitation lens. This doesn't also require movement. There doesn't have to be transportation involved. This doesn't always look like, oh, this is going from Arizona to Mexico. This could be down the street. This could be 2 blocks away. This could be out of the front home. So these things are very, very different and they're not interchangeable terms. Any questions on that one? Yeah.
One of the questions, so you prepare for how this one can be trafficking, like say, the immigration occurred as 4 or 5 years.
Sure. So vulnerabilities, and I wonder if that.
Okay, I didn't know we had in there.
No, that's okay. I want to see. I want to have a slide on vulnerability. So consider if you have somebody, again, who is coming across our border, they don't speak the language, right? They don't have typically any connections here. Maybe some do, but that's not always the case. They don't have any prospective documents, so they really have no foundational footing to begin a life here. They're easily targeted for trafficking scenarios. We typically see a lot of our migrant workers on our labor side are not always undocumented, but for the most part, that's our demographic outreach into that because we understand that there is specific vulnerabilities to that. But there's also very, I guess if you would say, successful stories in smuggling where a lot of people come across the border and they don't end up in trafficking situations. So there's really no rhyme or reason as far as who is and who isn't, but certainly that vulnerability and that risk factor goes up when you have no ties to someplace. And sometimes I just think about it like how kind of intimidating it is, if you've ever gone on vacation, international borders, and you're in a different country, and just the feeling of I don't necessarily know the language. I'm not even certain what this food is, or it looks good, or all those different things. Now figure that now you have to make a living, or your kids go to school, or things like that. So the integration piece is really where either that vulnerability is caught, or there's connection. But again, just making sure that the smuggling portion is that crime against the country to where the exploitation is the person. All right, this one, our data shows that the average age of exploitation is a little over 15 years old. So what that means, and this goes to kind of the perception too, as far as the age group of children that we try to target, which believe it or not, the public school climate, or just really school climates in general, are the hardest to be in front of right now. I have worked tirelessly with Deer Valley School Board, probably the past 2 years. We actually had one study session on potentially human trafficking training and awareness, where it was pretty clear that the consensus of the community was that they didn't want this in front of the kids. And I said, fine, get me in front of the staff, right? Get me in front of your teachers, your nurses, your social workers, your counselors. Those are the people that I need to target for the warning signs. Those are the people that our students have most contact with. I mean, my own kids probably spend more hours a day with their teachers than they do with our, us as parents. So I want you to understand how difficult that is right now in that kind of climate as far as the training is concerned. And, often too, people are, and I can appreciate that as parents, where they feel that, You know, this could be a conversation that happens at home. Okay, that's great. But if you don't understand what this is, how are you teaching your kids? What are you teaching your kids? And not only for that, but guess what? What about the kids that don't have parents? What about the kids that are living in group homes and transitional homes? I will tell you, and I have slides of this later on at the end, our transitional housing facility for survivors and their their kids as a family unit feeds into the Deer Valley School District. So when I sat down with the governing board, I said, listen, you have a stake in this. My kids feed into you. And none of them knew we had a transitional housing facility in the borders of Deer Valley. So that opens the question, do you know how many group homes you have? How many kids are in foster care? I mean, they take data on that when you enroll, but you actually understand this isn't some far off land scenario. Our facility is 15 minutes from here. That's a big difference. To have an understanding of the integration of kids, the kids that we serve, in a unit going right to public school and integrating with society. Again, we see that number one scenario is recruitment. Over 80%. I want you to just think about this number. 80% of victims have a relational tie to their trafficker somehow, somewhere. It's not a stranger. Friend of a friend. You know, Johnny's having a party and invites Susie, and Susie introduces to Sally. Oh, these are how those things connect, that there's some kind of rapport that's built. And it doesn't necessarily have to be adult to minor. This can be minor on minor, adult, adult, it doesn't matter. But over 80% have a relational aspect to their trafficker. We did speak about kidnaps. That's not to say that these certainly don't happen. They do. They're just not at the level that it's often portrayed as. Gang-related prostitution, also something that's not, you know, out of the norm. Not one of the top ones, but we do recognize that that's a factor. Familial trafficking. Who do you think the number one perpetrator is in a family unit as the trafficker?
The mom?
Yeah.
Yep. The mom? The mom.
You know why? So we're typically dealing with substance abuse, drug money, mental health. Yep. There's some kind of substance on the table. But again, that is a familial unit that has no borders, no barriers, right? It could be your neighbor down the street. It doesn't have to be in the areas where our prostitution tracks are located. These are the things that unless a child understands the difference of this is not a normal thing to do, right? Why until they get 25 and they go, oh my gosh, like my entire childhood I was doing this, and somebody now just tells me, right, that this is actually not a normal way of doing things. Imagine if we could capture it at around that high school age, how different those years lived in that trauma and exploitation could potentially be. Our runaways are at an extremely high risk. Again, when you think about what is a 15, 16, 17-year-old going to do running away on the streets when you have to eat, you have to sleep? Basic needs are the most often exploited because they're the easiest. People know, oh, are you hungry? You haven't eaten in 3 days. I got a quick job for you, right? Here's what you're gonna do. And there's a meal. Same thing with clothing or shelter. I do often highlight that our LGBTQ community, these account for a very disproportionate number of our runaways and youth, leading them into higher vulnerabilities of trafficking, but it's not because of what they identify or how they identify. It's the response from the community and typically families, right? So just because somebody is, I'll use an example and say 17-year-old male, tells his parents he's gay. And the parents say, adios. He has no job, nowhere to live, no real roots, right? No foundations. Now, take another 17-year-old boy, same scenario, except the parents are like, you know what? It's okay. You know, you're still our son. We love you. And there's no difference in life. That child doesn't have the same risks as the 17-year-old whose parents kicked him out on the street with nowhere to go. So it's not the identification, again, it's the response to the identification. I always have to make that distinction.
And then a quick question.
Yeah.
You're talking about the transitional facility in Deer Valley South.
What was that?
Is it on Pinnacle Peak?
No, we are on Bell Road.
Okay.
We're on Bell Road.
I know there was a big controversy about that facility. It used to be like a juvenile facility and then.
Oh, you're talking about Adobe. No. We're transitional housing.
Okay.
We're transitional housing. Yeah, you were talking about the detention center. Yes, yes.
Did the Deer Valley School Board offer an explanation why they didn't think that would be appropriate for a 15-year-old? I mean, they're a sophomore, they're in high school. I don't understand, I can understand if they're in second grade.
Absolutely.
I do not understand if they are a high school student who's 15 years old, why they think that that would be inappropriate.
Do you really want the truth?
Yes,
Parents?
you're kidding me.
No. No, that's what I mean, the climate of what we're in and the parental oversight and not wanting these types of things,
Wow.
even in like, let's say a health related class, right? Or an age appropriate, like I said, like you just said, I'm not asking you to teach kindergartners, give me a break. I'm asking you to teach to the data that we're referencing that average age. And typically, I mean, even if you're looking at that 15 to 16 year, I mean, sophomore year at the best could be your minimum baseline. So we're not talking, about a 2-year-old, right? With parental consent and all those different things. It's the parent climate. Absolutely 110%.
So the school board said it's because parents would not.
They don't want the heat from the parents. Yeah.
How do they know they'd even have heat?
Oh, it was extremely difficult. It's a very, very touchy subject.
Wow.
It took me almost a year to get to the table of a study session so I could explain what my intentions were. And that was with relationships of people that I worked with on the board, and in our district cabinet. And my own kids are in Deer Valley District. So like this, I'm not some random parent, right, who hasn't had, their foot in the game, or I graduated 2 kids from Deer Valley School District. But because of the pushback, because of we're coming off of things like COVID, presidential elections, all those different things have been wrapped into a lot of the climate of our school districts that our personnel, especially our elected officials, just don't even want to touch stuff anymore because the backlash is huge.
Too bad.
Right, and in this instance, right, you're talking about this education and things. Well, who's losing on this? The kids are. And to be truthful, so are the adults in the sense of the ones that are working with our students because they don't know what to do. They have no idea. We had a case, it was a case study years ago, but there was I don't know what age she was in high school, but she was in high school, and she was a pretty successful, AB student, nothing crazy, did some sports, type of a thing, and her grades had started to slide. And then she started showing up to school tired. Then there were also things where she had some new items, expensive purses, things like that, but it didn't make sense based on her housing scenario, right, that these things were incorporated. Then it started to dwindle. She showed up to class less and less. Her grades slipped. She was no longer on the teams. Nobody caught those red flags. And that happens as a progression. It's not an overnight thing. But if nobody caught that, they just figured now she's just not coming to school. So the school was looking at consequences to that. Well, now you're not going to graduate, or now you're not going to get this credit. Nobody along the way looked to say, this doesn't look good. She was being trafficked. And that was determined through a police report. So these are the things that if people really understood kind of what that encompasses, You have to puzzle piece all those different things together. But if you're not given that information, I always say, what you don't know, you don't know. And that's true. But the unfortunate piece is we're finding that number is probably going to be going down. It'll be getting younger with the advantage of technology and all the different ways kids can meet other kids, adults, all those different things. We're not going to see that number stay at 15. I don't know when it'll change, but I can tell you that it's already been lower. We were at 15.3 when I started about 3 years ago. So that's not going to be a solid number for long. And unfortunately, with the exposure to a lot of the things that our kids are exposed to, these conversations matter. There's a little bit more of those risks and protective factors I was talking about. So obviously, when you have family instability in regards to anything, it could be financial, it could be substance abuse, it could be domestic abuse, all of those different things lead to not just the nexus of saying, oh, that automatically means this child or this person is going to be trafficked. No, but it can put you in vulnerable situations, absolutely. Again, we also know that 22% of special education students identified in our studies were trafficked. That's huge. 22%. Why do you think that is?
Because they figured they won't tell someone.
The vulnerabilities.
The vulnerability of the child and their issues.
Yeah. Absolutely. Not knowing sometimes maybe what feels right, what feels wrong. So we know that exists. Child welfare involvement. We know that group homes and BCS involvement are not the best case scenario for any kiddo. And unfortunately, when you add histories of runaways or what they call AWOL at juvenile facilities, that just exacerbates, again, those vulnerabilities in trafficking because there's really the lack of parental oversight in that. Makes that super hard. Compared to when you have things like this, where you're understanding what healthy relationships are, open communication, feeling purpose, and having extracurriculars regardless of what they are. Awareness is huge. I should probably flip that and that should be like at the top. But these are the things that matter. I always tell people, my kids have grown up with me pretty much unsheltered in any of the work that I've done over the past 15 years. Between different ministry circles I was in, homeless outreach, trafficking, domestic violence. Because for me, I want my kids to understand the life they live at home with us is not the 99% of kids. This is not almost that kind of bubble of reality, right? That there is such a gratitude and a privilege for the things that my kids are able to have or exposed to or grown up with, but having the perspective of understanding that's not everybody's story. And to me, that matters. And so having that exposure to those things is something that I've been passionate about in my own journey. I have some friends that also know, you're crazy, you're taking your kids here. And I'm like, yeah, because I don't want my kids to be 40 years old and go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this like cycle of poverty existed down the street, or those kinds of things are real for me. Because I see those people every single day. That's just something that I just had, my husband and I had chosen. We want our kids involved in that. They'll probably tell you, well, that's because mom doesn't let me do this now, or, like they've got a different side to that, but I think deep down they understand that they have a better perspective of the world. And so I'm okay with that. Speaking of better perspective, one of the things that we do often see in victims, these are real clients, is their tattoos or brand names. They are not always in inconspicuous places. Like you can see, this one here has money bags right up on the neck. We've had clients at a housing facility that have had tattoos across foreheads and faces. So this is something that when I had started my position and the oversight at Phoenix Starfish Place, which is our housing facility, I would never have imagined I would need resources for tattoo removals. Like, I'm thinking I need food, right? I need supplies, I need the basic things for somebody to, live with. Never once was I like, oh my gosh, I need to find an organization that removes tattoos, and yet I have. So those are the things that are the realness, because imagine waking up to this every single day when you're trying to heal. It's that constant reminder of what was there, and especially when it's in places that are absolutely visible. Try getting a job when it's across your forehead, right? Like the reality of something like that, or big old signs. Sometimes they're a little bit difficult to determine, gang affiliation, but this loyalty, money bags, faith, like those are pretty indicative words of trafficking victims. They can look different, based on the artist or whatever, but those are pretty kind of like those key words where we're like, okay, especially when they kind of look like that. The other thing I wanted to just address is really what this looks like as far as identifying victims. I know that there's a lot of things that often we can come across, especially on social media, where we may think like, oh, this is a real thing, or these are real scenarios. I can tell you, as far as the hand signals are concerned, those are not real. Those are not anything that a victim does to seek out help. I can tell you that in our operations with our PD team, I've literally sat across from a victim who doesn't identify herself as a victim, and other times where she has literally just been beat the crap out of by a trafficker who's waiting in the car, and she will tell you to your face, it's fine. Nothing's wrong. So when you think about that, there's very rare are there victims that will come in and immediately self-identify or seek help. It takes numbers of interactions with victims in order to almost get them to talk to you, to build rapport, or to even have a consideration that, oh, this is actually what this is, because the majority of the times, our victims will say, well, I'm, 25 years old, right? This is my choosing. It's really not. Because our numbers show that 9 out of 10 people that we engage with on the prostitution track are actually trafficked, meaning there's a third party involved. So even if that woman or that man says, but I'm doing this, I'm consenting, they're not. They're not when it comes to that line and the third party is involved. So this is just a little bit of a glance to kind of give you an idea for some of our data. That is a real picture taken from the streets of Phoenix. So the city of Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the nation. We also have the largest prostitution track in Maricopa County. So in response to that, and this is where we are super lucky to have this partnership, is that the city of Phoenix has actually tasked what they call a strategic initiatives compass plan, where addressing human trafficking is part of the city's internal initiatives. So they're not saying, oh, it's bad for business, we're not going to acknowledge that we have the largest prostitution tract in Maricopa County. They say, listen, we know we do. How do we work to solve this problem? And so a bigger piece to that is that my office works with our Phoenix police HEAT team, which is the Human Exploitation and Trafficking team. And we have non-arrestable events, operations that go along with them, where we are intercepting potential victims and offering services for that evening. So you can kind of see over the years, and they're called stop events, so they're sex trafficking outreach projects, how the total number of victims, and mind you, this is just victims that are identifying in that screening of trafficking. So this is the glimpse of people that we have actually had contact with doesn't necessarily represent the total as far as what we know what there is. We know there's a lot more, but this is what we've interacted with. Where we had 450 adults offered supportive services. So at 415, which is at 89%, accepted services of some kind. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that night they've gone into housing or they've sought out shelter, but that also could attest to they've taken medical. Maybe they've taken stuff on medical testing. Maybe they've gotten a connection with our hotline. There's things right where they're making those connections along the way. And so these are events that we pretty much covet because this is actually the boots on the ground type of work, where we come back and we say, listen, these are the numbers we're looking at. These are some of the things we address. And if a victim decides to speak with us, we do have a data survey. So we kind of get that demographics background, where they're coming from, how old they are, things that they disclose to us also help build this picture. So here's a little bit more broken down as far as these are the totals up here. You can see the number or the types of events where we've actually held them. You can also see right here when we talk about race, 41% of the victims we encounter are African American. The next at Caucasian is at 23%, so there's a pretty big disparity as far as that's concerned. And then you can kind of just see down here, Hispanic comes in at the next at 18%. But this is what we're identifying as far as what the majority of victims that we're encountering comes with. You can also see, depending upon the type of event we have, so let's say this one is we're in a hotel, we do these operations. The age range is 18 to 53, so with on an average about 30 years old. Your street age range, a lot younger. So the street prostitution looks very different than somebody coming into what we call an in-call ad. Okay, so the age, this is what we really want to target. Because we understand when you're getting lower and lower. I think if there's anything else on this. I think that pretty much summed up the two points I wanted to make on there. Does anyone have any questions on that data? No? All right, here's a little bit more. Scope of trafficking, specific to Arizona. We have 309 child victims identified from a report we did from 2021 to May of 2023. You kind of see what the age range there. 20% were trafficked as children. Again, we're seeing that the high risk of runaways, persons of color, the LGBTQ community, very high vulnerable risk. Again, here we see our 22% reported they've been in special education. And right now we are in the process, my research team is just finishing up this amazing, maybe you've seen some of the reports on the news. We've been doing a survey in the American County jails. MCSO is a big partner of ours. We've already identified 51% of women incarcerated in jail have been reported trafficked. When they understand what trafficking is, and when our research team goes in and actually surveys them, they've been like, holy crap, that's actually what happened to me. But the fact that 51% of women that's happened to, the cool part about how data interlines with programming is now we're working with MCSO and we're saying, listen, here's what we've identified. Now let's look at programming to help, right? Because there's no rehabilitation in the jails. There's no trauma-informed care being offered. So now we're able to say, listen, based on our research, here's different things that we're able to implement. And that's our next phase of what's happening right now, which is really cool. But those opportunities don't exist outside of that. And again, here's your numbers of what most people just don't think, that 17 to 20% range, traffickers are a family member. It's very, very personal in regards to that. I always put this up here as something, for you to consider watching. So this was done in 2019, but this is actually here in Phoenix. So this was taken on a portion of the track. I think it's less than like an hour, but this gives you kind of that real, really like of what our key unit looks like, what they do, and the way that they interact with victims and engage in operations. So if you're going to watch anything, I highly encourage something like that. And you can find it, it's free on YouTube. I want to say it's on Prime, but I know if you looked it up, if you Googled it, it comes up on various. Yeah.
And they love things, and I didn't want to say it in the beginning, so after we talk about the reason why, and who's supposed to be around people, finding people, I'm looking at it. The recording is even is that maybe some things they make the traffic. And they want to record, that's why I was kind of like, you record, record, because that number right there, it's one of the things that I was doing that kind of, when you're in traffic, like, you get for a while, and I needed to be on it, so it's too late, and I'm like, huh. I think, what? Why does mom do that? Right? And then you're ready to shoot. And it's mom, not that. You are so all sorts of good. I mean, you can get feel well, realize that if you're looking at a crowd of people, you don't always have to look at mom. You want to, I mean, no one else has to look at dad.
Right.
Mom.
Right.
They're out.
And it's really interesting too. I did a tour one day for our we have some medical partners in the Mayo, and he always brings in kind of his first year nursing students, and because obviously teaching the medical community for identification of traffickers that come into ERs, or just seeing them if it's a one-time thing, having that medical professional trained in what some of these symptoms look like. So we're like halfway through at the tour at our housing facility, and this one particular medical student, I could tell she was getting a little bit flustered. But I was like, I'm not like, didn't register really why, because I'm like getting a housing tour. Like didn't get a phone call, like nothing that I could foresee happening. So I looked at my partner and I was kind of like on the side, like, what's going on? And he was like, yeah, I don't know. So I kind of broke them up into groups, and I was in one area, and so I said, hey, can you kind of figure out, like, her demeanor was instantly changed. Something just happened in this 5 minutes we were in this hallway. So come to find out, and it's just after the fact he tells me this, literally in our hallway during our tour, she's realized what's happening. And she's probably 20-something, an adult. But in that moment, in that realization, when I was describing the survivors that we house here at our facility and the understanding of what trafficking is and some of those different things, I wasn't even getting into the nitty-gritty. She had put it together all these years that this was something she experienced, probably to the point that she was releasing all of that stored trauma and exploitation just in this space that had, who knows how long it had been going on. But it just goes to show there's no, just say, oh, because I live in an affluent area, it doesn't happen, or because I do this or do that for a job. There's no borders to this, which makes it even that much more difficult to identify. One of the first things that we were able to establish, so we are on year 3, which is really cool because Arizona, and this is something we are so proud of, is the first state in the nation to have a local human trafficking hotline that is run 24/7. So the team of agents out of my office rotate as far as with how they're on it, times and things like that, but are partners with DPS. So what happens is when a potential person, and this goes for community members as well too. So if a community member calls in, let's say they have a tip, and you've been really concerned about this part of, this corner every morning, there's this guy and this girl, just something doesn't look right? And you've seen them now for a week, and you're like, I don't know, like, do I call the police? You can, but you can also call our trafficking tip line and put a tip in. So because DPS routes those, that is a law enforcement side that will be investigated upon. Now, if it is a client, meaning a victim or a survivor that's calling in, DPS warrant transfers them over to my agents. Then the victim services side starts. But this is really cool because we do offer bilingual languages. Like I said, our agents are 24/7. So they will work more with clients in crisis to determine if there is housing need, right? Shelter. Do we need recovery assistance? Do we need detox? Possibly do we need financial assistance? Things like that. My team will actually work with. So this is something on all of our information, and I've got a specific flyer to that we really try to push that hotline number out. And again, we deal with adults. So let's say there was a juvenile that wanted to call in, we would route that with DPS, or if there was a guardian in their presence. But we are focused on that consent and that communication with the adult population. All right, so here, this is I always tell my director, you know, you're not always the funnest, like, bubble in the booth, right? If people are like, oh, you're around these big social events, and I never have time. And I never say what I do. I'll just say, oh, ASU, or, kind of leave it at that, right? And you always have those people who want to be like, oh, but like, what do you do? And I'm like, do you really want to know? Because I'll tell you, but I'm pretty sure, like, that's gonna ruin the wine you have in your hand, or like, you're not, like, I'll just use to the buzzkill. And, but yet, what it does is it opens up this conversation. Yes, there's so many things, you guys, that I'll tell you, like, man, I could live the rest of my life not reading the crap that I've had to read, see the things I've had to see, like, do offs with our PD and just leave heartbroken and want to be like, bang my head against the wall and just be like, why the hell does this matter, right? Like, all of these things can feel so heavy. When I'm at Starfish, there's just there's a peacefulness about it. My clients, they're like our family. We call them, they're a family. Our transitional facility are not clients that are in a crisis mode. So our clients all have to be survivors of sex trafficking. They have to be female. They have to be an adult, and they have to have at least one minor child in their custody. So because we have 15 apartment units, and I also want you to keep this number and kind of think about how almost ridiculous this sounds. 15 apartment units. We are the biggest transitional housing for sex trafficking survivors in the nation. 15.
Well, politicians don't get bored on when we can hear this.
Right.
No one's topics that no one's talking
So I mean, it's not the like funnest topic. However, I will tell you that in a lot of my networking options, I've been in rooms with a lot of business owners. You go with money and influence and things, and I've said, I've done trainings, and I said, okay, so let me ask you a question. You have 2 resumes on the table, and just by paper, they both meet the qualifications. So there's really not one that stands out above the other. However, you go and do the background check. One of them has a pot for prostitution. What do you do with that application?
Bye-bye.
Do you know I had every single business owner in that room? And I said, yeah. And not to man hate, they were pretty much all men, okay? But I said, but yet, you want their lives turned around. You want them off access. You want them off food benefits. You don't want anybody on government assistance because they should just get a job. But they were trying. And you can't. These are the things that matter because our clients in a transitional setting, they are stable, they are sober as part of our requirements, they have mandated programming, we have case management on site 7 days a week. Our facility is a 2-year program. So we are not a place where somebody can go and earn free housing for 2 years. You actually have to work here, or you have to be in school, but you have to pay your utilities, and there's subsidized rent. This is where the partnership really, the boots hit the pavement with the city of Phoenix, because the city actually subsidizes our rents for our residents. They are rent capped on this. These things are so hard to exist.
Do these facilities have to be government funded? Like, can you have like a private facility that's funded by like grants and businesses? Because I'm thinking this is similar. I have an adult with special needs and we toured the treasure house. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It sounds very similar. You have to have a job, they have resources, whatever. But that's all funded by grants from businesses and different things. Like, is there a way to make more transitional facilities? Or is it reliant on government?
So, and that's a big piece of, the hard part right now is, believe it or not, like the cuts to our special services or social services, I should say, these are the things that they affect. Like when our SNAP benefits or our food benefits were put on hold, right? My residents have to figure out, okay, what does that mean for those 2 months that there was no extra money? Now, to some of us, it may be like, okay, well, it was $200 or whatever, $300, but to somebody who relies on that, that's life or like filling my cabinets or not. So unfortunately, there aren't enough private foundations that we can rely on in order to make stuff like this happen. And I talk to different counties all across the nation. And one of the things they always ask me is, they're like, Steph, how are we doing this? First and foremost, we have the city behind us. Because if we didn't have the subsidized rents, if we didn't have the grant contracts between our community bridges, who is our case management, and even property management, there's 4 agencies that go into running this, including ASU, my office. Not ASU, the university, ASU, my office, that go into running this. But everybody's got their respective lanes and their respective grants. So without that portion of a money fund, if you will, the privates just aren't enough. And then that is a buy-in to, you've got to get people who that's their passion, that's their care back, in order to make stuff like that happen. So having the 4 agencies on the site every day is still a hustle. Like, we call this our hope hustle. So I hustle for food, like in our on-site food pantry. Those are a community, I rely on community donations. Because heaven forbid, you cannot buy food on government grant money. Okay. So things like that, furnishing our apartments, like they don't come furnished. I have to find community organizations for that, different partners, donors, sponsorships, all of those different things. So when you start adding up the great, you have the housing, but all the stuff that it takes to actually help somebody transform and heal, it all comes down to money. And that's one of the things that we could even address that and make that, congruent with the unsheltered population. Sure, you could have 85 facilities, if you will, and you can house people all day long, but if you don't have the supportive services, a lot of the recovery services, which require staff, the programs, right? All the things that encompass helping somebody to stabilize, all you're doing is housing them. There's no change. There's no ability to change because they're not given resources. So I want to play this away.
Oh, you just.
Maybe what did I do? You want me to? There, okay. So one of my big donors, a year and a half ago, was the Cross Blue Shield, and specific to helping us furnish our apartments. And so these are the things, like these are the partnerships that I have to embed with because I can't rely on the government grants for that. They're not cutting it anymore.
Things start to place that trafficking survivors feel seen, they feel connected, our survivors feel that. At really start to place, I don't say. I don't know. Yeah. And nowadays people kept, loving me. They love you here, so you love yourself, they changed my life, changed my daughter's life. It's getting from across the shoulder on us, that are teaching. So our goal with this incredible gift was to really give back to these women and their families, to lift them up and help them heal from the trauma they experienced. This isn't just a landing pad, it really is a launch. Starfish Place caps their monthly rent at 30% of their gross income. Then we take half of that, and that is put into the escrow account. When they leave, they actually have a little bit of savings to go with. Our residents are required to do 2 mandatory program nights a week. Are they looking for, specific kinds of therapy classes? All of those different life skills incorporated, and a little bit of fun too. City of Phoenix Housing Department plays a pivotal role in establishing this one-of-a-kind community that has 15 apartments that are 2 and 3 bedrooms. The space has beautiful grounds that provide a welcoming environment. It was comforting, and it was good to know that I wasn't alone, and to all come together and agree on what things that we wanted to change, and this was good. I hope everything started.
I'm a little bit over on time, so I will end with that, but what I want you to understand is this isn't just about the training and the data. This is the real people, the boots on the ground that are
I have a question, I'm curious, have you approached and received a better response from the charter schools over the public schools? Have you approached them?
I don't have any charters.
Really? Why not?
I haven't had any, I'm trying to think if any of my other colleagues work. But there's not a name that comes up that I can think of off the top of my head, no.
Isn't that a?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely not.
Maybe we should.
Yep.
All right, I think one of these.
Yep, I'll take whatever I can get, absolutely.
Get you from there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's what the community networking is for. I can tell you for often too, when I have people that ask, like, what is the impact I can make? Where are the different things that can be involved in? Helping us out with, rallying, whether it's neighborhood groups, faith-based groups, community things, drives. I mean, it sounds silly, but like as simple as holding like a shampoo and conditioner drive, right, with your neighborhood. Or it could be, trying to think of some of the other things, like I've got flyers for everything. I have flyers for like most coveted foods, most coveted hygiene items. I mean, those things, it sounds, juvenile on paper, but again, those are what help fill the gaps, and it takes the community to step in and do those things.
So if we're purposeful to donate to you versus goodwill.
Absolutely,
So.
absolutely.
You get maybe a box here or something like that.
Yep.
That could provide you with some essentials.
Absolutely. And I brought my card tonight as well too, so you can have my cell and my email for contacts like that. But those are kind of the bigger picture things. We do have certain events throughout the year that we do allow volunteers at. Obviously, my law enforcement stings are off the charts, but my we just had one actually on Saturday, right in the heart of the prostitution track, and we served 48 clients. But that took 15 of us agencies together to come to a space and offer various different services to have on site. But 48 clients was huge for the day. And they're literally walking in right off the street. So like those are the things that I'm able to bring volunteers to, that people can actually see firsthand what this looks like. Doing a marketing event for an outreach, you don't throw that up on socials. Like that's street marketing. That's literally taking flyers at bus stops and behind restroom doors and things like that, where our clients we know are going into because they're not looking on social media for anything, right? So it's that whole different perspective. But if nothing else from tonight, that if it's just something that you really start to think about in a new light, and think about, you know, what we may have been told or taught, or even things that you may see online, and thinking about some of the data here that was shared, and really kind of what that reality and that picture is. And then if you feel led, you know, helping to make that difference at Phoenix Starkers Place, and oversight with my survivors. So I just, like I said, I know I went over time here, but I also wanted to leave you guys with some resources as well. And please feel free to reach out to me if stuff comes up and you're like, oh, I have this question, or, you know, any kind of thoughts or anything that you have down the road. Like, I would love for you to reach out, and I can do my best to try to answer that or get you pointed in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Are you okay to stick around?
Yeah, absolutely.